Hey everybody, how's it going? Let's talk about your home recording studio. Today we're finally gonna get around to the last episode of season 2 of Let's Mix. Let's stick a fork in this one and call it done. Before I even get started, I want to put out a very heartfelt thank you to JD for providing the files and his song for this whole project. I really appreciate it, and this has been a lot of fun, a lot of work, don't get me wrong, but also a lot of fun. And also, it's been a learning experience for me. This is something I don't do very often, which is mix people's music other than mine. So this has been a really good experience all around. I hope that you've enjoyed it. I know that I've enjoyed it. And yeah, thank you very much for letting me use your song for this whole project. You know, this song has actually made my job relatively easy. If you've been following along with the series so far, you know that really all I've used in this whole mix, I haven't done anything like super fancy. There hasn't been a whole lot of like fixing of things. Really, just a little bit of auto-tune on a couple of notes of the vocals is just about it for fixing stuff. Everything else has just been levels, panning, EQ, compression, and a little bit of reverb, right? There's nothing fancy going on here. It's just a lot of work to make your way through all those little decisions all the way through the process here. So one note before I get started is that this is actually my third attempt to record this video. I recorded it once of that first round of revisions after the rough mix. So the mix is no longer in the same state that it was when you heard it last. And that's because I'd shot one video where I made a round of revisions. I just wasn't happy with what I ended up with as far as, entertainment value of the video. So I pretty much trashed that one. Last night I came to record this again, and when I went to edit it, I realized that my recorder was clipping the whole time. Somehow, I don't know what changed in my routing and gain staging and everything between my audio interface and the recorder, but the audio was garbage and it was unusable. So I had a whole episode shot last night and I had to throw it away because this channel is all about audio and it's really no fun to just sit and listen to a distorted clipping audio track the whole time. Okay, so since the mix is not in the same state, I've basically already made all of the revisions I'm going to make to the mix. So I've tried a couple of times to figure out how I'm going to do this episode. So I think what I'm going to do here to wrap this up and keep it relatively short is I'm just going to go walk through some of the revisions that I made, illustrate some of the kind of the high points and everything. And let's actually start off here. Let's just listen to the mix in its current state. Again, there's a master limiter on it, so it's going to be substantially louder than it was last time you heard it. But first, let's just take this song's about 4 minutes long. So, hey, you got 4 minutes? I've never played the song in its entirety in this whole series, so let's hear the song start to finish, and we'll just kind of watch it play here so you don't have to stare at me listening to the song. So. All right, cool. You know, honestly, I think that's a pretty badass song. So the reason I say why JD like made my job easy here is not only are the parts well recorded, so there wasn't a whole lot of. I mean, you know, there was a couple of like level issues with the vocals where you know things had gotten chopped up and then re-exported. So you know, I had to fiddle with that a little bit, sure, but everything the recording is high quality, like the guitars, the vocals, the bass, the drums, everything very high quality recording. Also, it was well performed, right? Everything's tight, the timing's tight, it works together as a whole. But also, one of the biggest favors that he did me as the person mixing here was in the arrangement itself. So as you listen through that song, you can hear that it's not everything all the time, right? So there's parts of the song where the vocals say their piece, and then a guitar plays a counterpoint to it, and the vocals come back and say their piece, and then something else does a counterpoint. So it's different things stepping forward to take the center stage, and then stepping back to let something else step forward and take center stage. And that makes mixing so much easier because you're not having to do so much surgical EQ to try to give everything its own little slice of everything. Really the mixing in this case is largely in the arrangement of the song and when things decide to try to step forward. It really makes everything so much easier. Now, on that same note, there are a couple of things that I really struggled with in this mix. And one thing that I never really got right, and here, let's take a look here real quick. One thing that I never really got right to my own satisfaction was the guitar line called lead 1. Now lead 1 is, here, let's go back to the beginning of the song here. Lead 1 is the guitar that's panned a little right, so I've got this 40% right, and he's playing that lead line, and he's the one that ends the phrase with that little kind of 7th chord thing. So that 7th chord sticks out well because there's not much competing with it. It's got its own, it's something about where he's playing on the neck and you know the EQ and everything. But since I have to assume that all the guitars, all the electric guitars in this were the same guitar through the same amp, you know, even with different settings, maybe a different pickup or something, you're still playing the same guitar, the same pickups through the same amp with the same speaker and you know the same microphone and everything. So all the things that those elements reinforce, even if you start dialing in different settings, it is going to start to reinforce kind of the same frequencies kind of over and over. And so even though you're playing different things, if it was on the same guitar, same amp, same mic, same speaker, everything, there is going to be quite a bit of overlap in the frequencies. And I think that is what was happening with this one. So let's take a look at lead 1. And, well, actually, let's take a quick listen so you know which guitar I'm talking about here. And it is this one. Right, so that one just kind of still gets lost, and I tried several things with it. So here, let's take a look at what I ended up with. On this one, I ended up with a pretty crazy EQ curve here. So I chopped out the bottom with a high-pass filter. This is a lead electric guitar. It doesn't really need bottom end in it. I took a narrow chunk out around 500 hertz, and that was to get rid of a little bit of that just kind of boxy kind of sound it had to it. And then I ended up with a really wide boost of, let's see, that is at about 5.8, so almost 6 dB of boost with a wide Q on it, a wide bandwidth, as Reaper puts it, because that's kind of where it wanted to stick out. At one point I had an even higher boost on it, and unfortunately that 5K, while it does bring presence to that guitar part, it also accentuates kind of like the kind of fizzy quality that you get in electric guitar tones. Apparently that's right around 5K. So while it helped it stand out, it also kind of accentuated that fizziness to it, that kind of gritty high frequency sound to it. So I ended up dialing it back, so yeah, it's at about 6 dB, which is still a pretty hefty boost. And it still just didn't quite, it still just muddled into everything. So what I ended up doing as kind of a counterpoint to that, if we go down, let's see here, we're the rhythm guitar folder. So this is both of the rhythm guitars in one folder. So let's take a look here at the effects. And you can see on the rhythm guitars, that's what I figured that they were competing with the most. Again, probably same guitar, same amp. So with the rhythm guitars, I actually dug out a pretty wide scope of EQ here. So I dug out minus 3 decibels, and that's centered at about 2.8K, 2800 hertz. And what that ended up doing was actually giving a little bit of breathing room so that lead 1 had a little bit more room. So even though this is down at 3K, so, and this is up still quite a bit at 3K, it's not quite up, 6 dB. But those two together just kind of gave that guitar a spot to live a little bit, since they were competing so much. It's one of the few things in this mix that was just two things really stepping on top of each other. I'm still not 100% happy with where I ended up here, but it's better than it was, and that's about all I can promise here. One thing I did on the rhythm guitar folder, so I dropped the high pass filter. So right now it's at 150 hertz. I believe I had it up a little bit higher than that, and it was just shaving off a little bit too much bottom end of those guitars. So a high pass filter generally steps off at 12 decibels for every octave. And so here, if it starts at 150 dB, or I'm sorry, 150 hertz, then for every octave you go down from there, it's losing 12 decibels of gain. And so when I had that up a little bit higher, it was just, it really kind of neutered those electric guitars a little too much. It was a little too much of what I was doing. A high pass filter is a very aggressive filter, and you got to be careful with them, or else, yeah, you can do like what I did and accidentally, inadvertently neuter something and make it sound really weak and hollow, and then just dropping that down, a few notches in the frequency there helped it actually retain some of its beef, but still stay out of the way of all the other stuff going on down the low end there. So for the bass guitar, even though the original is muted, what you're hearing in the mix is a rendered stem. But before I rendered it out, so I had a high pass on it as well, just because I was trying to make room for the kick drum, and it didn't really work. The kick drum is still largely absent in this mix, that's one of the things that I wish that I'd done better in this mix was make the kick drum more present. So I had dialed the high pass filter up pretty high, so I dropped that back down to about 60 hertz, 61 hertz, and that, as you could hear in the mix, there's plenty of bass guitar in the mix, right? So it's not lacking low end. I just wanted to get rid of a little bit of rumble and low frequency stuff. All right, let's see here. What else did I do on lead 2? The EQ curve that I ended up with on lead 2. So lead 2 is the one that's playing kind of counterpoint to the verse vocals. The verse vocals kind of say their thing, and then the lead 2 steps in, and he's the one that's panned over left. So here I've got him panned 36% left. So let's take a quick listen at something that lead 2 is doing. So like right about here.
Fell in love with the comedy. A simple sense of security.
Right, so that's that guitar that's kind of, almost trading licks with the vocals there. So I shaved off a pretty hefty amount of low end on him with the high pass filter. I also dipped him out at, let's see, that's at 773 hertz. That was just a little bit of boxiness there as well. So I just, with a relatively narrow bandwidth, narrow Q, I just dug out, looks like almost 4 dB right there, just to kind of get rid of some of that, I don't know, there was a frequency that was just offending me at that time. The clean guitars actually stayed pretty much the same as you heard them last, so I'll skip over those guys. The phaser break, that's that phaser guitar that goes when the rest of the band goes tacit. One thing that I did do, so I didn't change that phaser guitar really since you heard it last, but one thing that I did do was I realized that the bass guitar was holding a sustained note through that whole phaser break, and I didn't like that. So what I ended up doing on the bass guitar, let's go find that spot, and if I look at my markers up top, so there's the phaser solo, yeah, right about here. So let's take a look at the bass line stem, which is the one that you're hearing, and let's zoom in on that a little bit. And so what I ended up doing was right when everything breaks, and you can see right here, this is the time in the timeline when everything goes tacit except for that really heavily phaser sounding guitar. And I ended up using Reaper's fader or fade. If you go to the edge of any wave file, any item, you can just grab it and like create a little, yeah, here, let me undo whatever I just did there. Let's do it like right here. You can just grab it and it'll add a fade. You can see the waveform actually fading out and following this curve. So I ended up doing that to the bass guitar because I didn't want to chop it off abruptly. I kind of liked that it sustained a little note while everything else went tacit and the phaser guitar is going. But the problem was the bass guitar held the same note and it just rung out through that whole thing. But the phaser guitar is changing chords, and those chords were beating against the one note that the bass was ringing out right there. So let's just take a quick listen to what that ended up sounding like. But yeah, and then it picks up right again there when everything just kind of comes back in. You get that impact. But I didn't want that one note ringing out the whole time there. So that's what I ended up doing there. I just faded it off here, split the item here, split the item here and here, and ended up just dragging the volume of this all the way down. All right, okay, let's see what else. So we made it to the phaser break. Let me zoom back out so I get a better bird's eye view of the song here. The phaser solo, I don't think I really did much to that. I think I'd already added reverb to it last time you had heard. Oh yeah, speaking of reverb, let's go back to lead one real quick. That was another thing that I did to help lead one stand out. I forgot to mention this just a minute ago. So if we click on this guy right here and show the sends, you can see I'm doing one send on that lead one to a large chamber reverb and doing another send to a room reverb. Now the large chamber reverbs are relatively bright reverbs. They're pretty conspicuous, but it's what I had used on other elements of the song to just add a little bit of spaciousness, a little bit of depth to it, distance things from the listener just a little bit. So that lead one part was just sounding too dry. So I just added just a tiny bit. I basically dialed it up to where I could notice it in the mix and then dialed it back just a little bit from there. And that ended up with an inconspicuous amount of reverb on it that really you're not going to notice until you turn it off. And then you'll miss it. And then you turn it back on like, okay, yeah, there it is. Now with the room reverb, that's just something, a personal preference of mine. I love putting a room reverb on a lead, like a solo guitar part. I just love that it kind of puts it in a place. It puts it in an environment and not just a big echoey mess. It just makes it sound like it happened in a room. Now, the Lexicon reverb that I'm using on this in this mix, I'll be honest, its room reverbs aren't that great. You know, it's an emulation of their digital units. And a digital room reverb is, yeah, it's not going to sound like a natural room reverb. So I kept it pretty low in the mix again. So on the chamber reverb, I've got him dialed down to, where's he at? Minus 21 dB on the send. And on the room reverb, I've got him dialed up quite a bit more. So he's only at minus 9.8, so minus 10. So about, half of... I'm sorry, about twice what the chamber reverb is doing. But that, again, that's just to add just some ambience, make it sound like it happened in a room. I love that on a lead guitar. And also a room reverb adds a little bit of almost a slapback delay kind of effect. And a slapback delay is a great way of helping something stand out in a mix because it essentially prolongs every important note that happens on that thing. So it just kind of makes the notes stretch out in a perceived way. It sounds like the notes stretch out, which gives them a little bit more impact, a little more noticeable, makes them stand out a little bit in a mix. So that's something I love doing, and that was just a couple of things that I added to that to try to help that guitar, that poor guitar that was just getting so buried by everything else going on. One big thing, and I think I mentioned this in the drum episode earlier on, was that after I had been listening in other environments, I didn't notice it while I was listening in headphones here, but as I got into the truck, I got on the TV, I got, headphones at work, I started noticing the whole mix was just kind of leaning right a little bit. It was weird. Like it was just louder on the right than it was on the left. And after a little bit of consideration, I realized what I had done, and that was all of the stereo things, all the things that I had sent to my distressors as a stereo pair, they all ended up basically leaning to the right, and that's because my distressors aren't a matched pair. One actually has a little bit higher output volume than the other, and I didn't think of that at the time, so when I set them both to the same output level, one is actually going to be a little louder, and on this time it just happened to be the one on the right. And so everything I fed as a stereo pair through that pair of distressors ended up louder on the right than it is on the left. So stacking that up over the backing vocals, the second set of backing vocals, the drum mix, that added up, and the whole mix started just kind of leaning that way. So on the drums here, what I ended up doing was you can see the drums are actually panned 18% left. And that was me just taking that lopsided stereo mix and listening and starting to pan left until the snare sounded like it was in the middle. And once the snare was there, I ended up at an 18% pan over to the left. And just that alone helped even out the mix. The vocals, the backing vocals, both still lean right, but I don't mind that so much. I think it's okay in the context of this mix, just because of everything else that's going on at the time. Having those backing vocals just a little bit, inconspicuously leaning to the right, I didn't mind that so much. But having the drums way over there, it just started to get really annoying. Okay, what else did we go through here? Yes, the backing vocals. Oh, actually, there's one thing in the lead vocal that I ended up doing, and this is interesting enough. So in the very first line of the lead vocal in the song, where is he? Where's that lead vocal at? I misplaced him. There he is, verse, vox, lead. So the very first line of the song is "thought it was a joke," and that K in the word joke, I do this too, it just like jumped out. It was like a pop almost. And so you just heard this very conspicuous pop of that K, and even compressing the vocals didn't really help it. I have the same problem myself. When I do Ks and hard Gs, and something about the place on the tongue and the mouth, where that consonant comes from, for me as well, it tends to just kind of pop out. So what I've done in the past and what I ended up doing here was, let's zoom in nice and close here, and you can see as I zoom in farther and farther, let me turn off snap so I can click where I want. You can see here that there's actually a couple of splits in this file, in this media item, and so you can see that this is one item, and then this little teeny tiny spot right here is another item. Well, this teeny tiny spot right here is that K. It's that K sound. And so what I did is I split on either side of it, and then went and grabbed the top of the WAV file and just dragged the volume of that one little selection down. I didn't want to get rid of it completely because it's an important part of that word. He's not saying thought it was a Joe, he's saying thought it was a joke, but the K was so pronounced. So I just grabbed it, dragged it down, and it actually turned out okay. Let's just listen to that one little word here.
A joke.
Yeah, maybe that wasn't quite enough to okay, yeah, that wasn't quite enough room there to hear. So let's hear that entire first line of the first verse. And as he says the word joke, you can hear that K is just like a natural part of the word now.
Thought it was a joke, but we...
And maybe I dialed it down just a little too much. It could probably even stand to be in there just a little bit more, but it was just so poppy that I had to dial it down quite a bit so it wasn't conspicuous. All right, and something along those same lines in the last chorus, as the backing vocals are all stacked up there were a few syllables that were really kind of... So I'd compressed the backing vocals quite a bit, but there were a few syllables that were really still just kind of popping out. And since these are backing vocals and I wanted them kind of distanced from the listener, that's why I compressed them so much. it was just kind of weird to have these distant backing vocals, and every once in a while when they would say certain consonants like an F or an S or a T, it would just kind of jump out a little bit. So one thing that I did, I mean, there was one really bad one, and what I ended up doing with it, let's go find it here real quick, and I believe that was in chorus backing folder, yeah, and this stem here. So let's click on, get the playhead around there somewhere, let's zoom in on it. And as I zoom in, you can see I did something similar here, but not quite the same thing. What I ended up doing was splitting the item, you can see where the split is, and I actually used a fade again because it was just this first syllable that was kind of killing me. So I just put a fade to where it attenuates that quite a bit and then fades up into the actual regular level there. So that took care of that one kind of like really bad syllable. But what I noticed was it was still happening quite a bit, like just throughout that entire last verse, or really anywhere that those were a major factor in the mix. So what I ended up doing was adding a de-esser. And let's take a quick look right here. And it turns out Waves has a stereo de-esser, so this is a stereo file, so I want to preserve my panning. I don't want to collapse it to mono after I went through all that trouble to pan them, compress them as a stereo pair, re-export them as a stereo file. So the Waves makes a stereo version of their de-esser, and so I actually put that on there. So let's actually solo those vocals real quick and take a look at this column right here. This bar is the attenuation. And I got lucky. The default frequency of the de-esser here is 5500 hertz. And I got super lucky that happened to be where the main offending kind of syllables were. So I have this threshold dialed down to minus 38.5. Like that's really aggressive. That's a super low threshold, and you can see the attenuation is going to peak somewhere between minus 6 and minus 12 dB, which is a lot. But I like the results. So yeah, who cares how much attenuation it is or how low I have the threshold? If I like the results, great. So let's just take a listen to just the backing vocals here.
To keep up with the failure, for impetuous behavior, constant immorality.
Right, so you can see that it's like that. It's peaking, yeah, like around minus 12, but it's centered around. It's only compressing right around that frequency. I mean, it sounds really compressed, but that's because I've already compressed those vocals in the first place. De-essing, I would probably rather do it before any other compression rather than after, but I'd already rendered the files out with the compression printed onto that file, so I was just kind of stuck with it without re-rendering. Also, you notice in those backing vocals, you can hear some background noise, since they're so compressed, and then I brought the overall level up. That brought up all the quiet noises. That's just kind of what you do with compression. And you could hear things like breath noises, and you could hear leakage from his headphones as he was tracking. If you let that kind of thing stack up, track over track over track, or if you have a more sparse mix, yeah, that stuff is going to stick out like a sore thumb, and you're going to want to put some sort of a gate or go in and manually edit those things out, turn the volume down on just those idle parts between the actual vocal lines. This mix is loud and this mix is dense. There's a lot going on all the time. Now, if that was a problem on a whole bunch of tracks and it made a noticeable difference, yeah, I'd go back and probably start adding some noise gates or go in and start manually editing out some of those idle moments. In this kind of a mix, it's so loud and so dense, that stuff just disappears into the mix. I am not going to worry about it. I've listened to this mix enough. I don't feel like it detracts from anything. I don't hear any noticeable noise in there at all when everything else is playing. Everything else is so much louder than the sound of a little bit of leakage from his headphones. Now, if that, as you can hear, now we listen to that by itself, yeah, you can hear it sticks out like a sore thumb. You can hear it. So if this was a really sparse mix and that was one of the few tracks going on, there's a lot of space and silence and quiet things, then yeah, I would absolutely go back and edit that out or put a gate on it of some sort. In this mix, it doesn't make a lick of difference. Okay, well, I think that kind of hits all the high points. Let me look at my notes, see if there's anything else here that I need to mention. I've got my notes still from as I was listening, a couple of months ago, and I think that I pretty much hit everything that I wanted to hit. All the revisions I wanted to make, again, other than redoing the drum mix, which again, I apologize that I'm not doing that, but I just want to keep this thing moving forward. All right, well, I think we did it. We made it from just a blank project. We imported some files, we did levels and panning, and then instrument by instrument, we started mixing stuff and treating it and doing whatever I thought needed to happen to it. We made some revisions that, you didn't get to see. We made more revisions that you didn't get to see. But I hope that I've at least kind of detailed the kinds of things that I did. So as you can see, all the things that I did after the last episode were all really minor things, right? Because I already made all the big decisions kind of right up front in that first couple of episodes and in the levels and panning. And those were really kind of the biggest decisions about where things are going to sit, who's going to have this side, who's going to have this side, where's this thing going to be, how loud is that going to be, how quiet is that going to be. All those kind of big decisions we made up front, and then everything from there on was just minutia, just little subtle things that we did that all add up. Really the biggest thing that I did that you can hear, and here let's click on this real quick, on the master bus, so this strip right here is my master bus, you can see that I added Waves L2. And that's it. That's the only thing on the master bus. I'm not a mastering engineer. I'm not even going to pretend to be. All I wanted was to make it louder. And that I achieved that just with one instance of Waves L2. You can do the same thing with, just whatever stereo limiter. Make sure it's a stereo limiter, because all that work you put into panning and where everything is in the stereo field, if you put a mono limiter or compressor on the master bus, it's just going to collapse it right all back to dead center. And, you would have wasted all that time of placing things around the stereo field and where you want it to be. All right, so I think I'm going to go ahead and end this one here. Again, thank you, JD, for letting me use your song for this. I will put some links in the description below to JD's SoundCloud, to his YouTube channel, to any other media, social media, or anything that he wishes to share. I'll put some links in the description below so you can listen to some of his other stuff. He's come a long way. I got a lot of respect for JD because he's been one of those guys that initially none of this stuff came naturally to him, and he struggled and he struggled. But he kept at it, and he kept learning, and he kept trying and experimenting and practicing and doing the repetitions, and it really has paid off. So I haven't been to his SoundCloud page in a long time, so I can't remember, but you'll probably be able to hear a progression there as you listen to his older stuff versus newer stuff. He really has improved, and I think that's a really good testament to what you as well can achieve by just simply doing it. Just do it. You might be a little put off that this is hard and I'm not good at it. Well, keep at it, because you can get good at it. You can train your ears. You can refine the gear you have around you. You can refine your techniques, but mostly it's about doing and trying and experimenting and failing and learning from the failures. So I think that he serves as a really good example for us all. It's just a really good story, I think. Also, thank everybody that has been watching, that's been commenting, that's been liking and subscribing and all that stuff. I really appreciate it. Like I said not too long ago, this series, these Let's Mix series don't exactly bring in huge numbers of views because it's such a niche audience that we're going for here. And, if you've made it this far, you can tell, mixing is not really exciting. It's not really fun to watch somebody else mix. But I really do enjoy doing this because I think while I have not framed any of this stuff as hey, this is how you should do it, I've tried to frame it all as, hey, this is how I do it. Maybe you can learn something from how I do it. This is a very subjective thing. This is art we're dealing with. And when it comes down to it, there's... I hate to say it, but there's really not a wrong way to do it. There are ways to do it that will make nobody want to listen to your stuff. But I think when we're dealing with art, there aren't many just hard and fast rules. There's some rules of thumb, there's some, kind of guidelines, maybe some dotted lines, but you're free to color outside of the lines all you want when you do stuff like this, right? It's all about experimenting, trying, doing, learning from your mistakes, learning from your successes. So I hope that this has been at least some use to somebody out there. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to end this one here, and I will see you guys next time. Let's take a little dog break. How's all the dogs doing? Are you guys lonely or something? Daddy's up here talking to himself, I know. Yeah, it's just crazy. Why don't you go take a nap or something, all right? Yeah, you guys just go take a nap. It'll be okay. All right, you guys go away. Go on. Daddy's busy. Go on.